The road had been empty for miles, the kind of empty that made you doubt the world existed beyond your headlights. Then, through the veil of fog, a single glow, a gas station, small and alone, humming under a dying neon sign. Welcome, traveler. Tonight, we walk the roads that memory forgets, where doors open only once. Somewhere in the silence, something closed behind you, and the night changed its mind. The highway that night felt endless, not just in miles, but in time itself. The clock on your dash glowed in stubborn defiance, refusing to move past 2:17 a.m., as though the night had stopped progressing the moment you crossed into that stretch of road. The moon was low and pale, hanging like a forgotten coin over the tree line, and your headlights barely seemed to touch the asphalt ahead. You'd been following a route you knew well, one you had taken dozens of times before. But the last turn had felt different, like you'd driven into a place that hadn't been waiting for you, a place you had stumbled into without permission. There was a stillness here, a kind of quiet that made the hum of your tires sound intrusive. Then you saw it, a green mile marker up ahead, mile 0. It startled you, not because of its number, but because there was no such marker on this highway. You slowed instinctively, your foot easing off the accelerator. A few seconds later, just beyond the post, a light bloomed in the dark. Faint at first, then steady, a neon hum that seemed to cut through the cold air. It was a gas station. It shouldn't have been there. The pumps glistened under the buzzing fluorescent canopy, each one casting a perfect circle of pale light on the cracked pavement. The sign above the station was faded, the lettering indistinct, as though it had been erased and repainted countless times. You pulled in, more out of curiosity than necessity. The moment your tires rolled over the uneven lot, you noticed the silence deepen. The chirp of crickets, the distant rustle of trees, gone. Only the electric buzz of the canopy remained, steady and loud. You stepped out. The air was colder here, almost damp, with the faintest trace of gasoline and something else, something metallic. The front door of the station was a pane of glass, cloudy from years of grime, and behind it stood a man at the counter. He didn't move, didn't wave, just watched you approach. Inside, the warmth was immediate but unsettling. The fluorescent lights above hummed, flickering in the far corner. The man behind the counter was in his 60s, maybe older, wearing a name tag that had been polished so often the letters were unreadable. His eyes followed you without blinking, his chin tilted slightly down, as if to get a better look at you from under his brow. "Evenin'," he said, though the clock on the wall still read 2:17 a.m. You nodded back, moving toward the coolers in the back, though you weren't thirsty. Something about his gaze made your skin prickle. Every step you took, his head turned just enough to keep you in his line of sight. When you finally reached the register, you placed a bottle of water on the counter. His hands, thin, with veins like dry riverbeds, rested beside it without touching. "Long way from home," he murmured. You hesitated. "Yeah, I guess so." He tilted his head as if listening to something far away. The silence pressed in. "You'll be heading back soon," he said, not as a question, but as a certainty. You paid in cash. His fingers brushed yours, ice cold, even in the overheated room. As you turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice low, almost drowned by the hum of the lights. "Don't miss the turn." You stepped outside into the cold night air, your breath fogging in the dim light. The lot was empty, not just of cars, but of sound, movement, life. You climbed back into your vehicle, started the engine, and pulled away, headlights slicing the dark. A mile later, you passed the mile zero marker again. You slowed. The light appeared ahead. The same pale glow, the same buzzing canopy. You pulled in again, though you had no memory of turning around. The man behind the counter was there, unchanged, standing in the exact same position. "Evening," he said. This time, you didn't go inside. You backed away, tires crunching on the gravel. You tried the other exit road, the one that should have led you to the main highway. 5 minutes later, you passed the mile zero marker. Again. The gas station awaited, its lights unwavering, its sign humming like it knew your name. You gripped the wheel tighter, pushing past it without stopping, ignoring the shadow of the man now standing outside the glass door, his head tilted at the exact same angle as before. 10 minutes later, you saw the marker. The glow, the canopy lights buzzed louder this time. So loud you could almost hear words in the static. You turned on the radio just to drown it out. But instead of music, a low voice crackled through, thick with static. "Ready to come inside for good?" Your hand trembled as you switched it off. The air in the car had grown heavy, as though the space between the seats was shrinking. The darkness outside the windshield pressed closer, bending around the beams of your headlights like a living thing. The road unspooled endlessly ahead, but no matter how far you drove, the glow remained in the distance, steady, waiting. You began to wonder if there had ever been a way out at all, and when you finally stepped out again, the air tasted of rust and gasoline, and the paper in your hand carried no numbers, no prices, only a date from long before you were born. The night was thin, stretched over the world like a sheet too small to cover it. The stars shone cold and sharp in a sky that seemed further away than usual, and the road was the kind of straight that made you forget how to turn. You had been driving for hours, the gas gauge dipping lower than you liked, the needle trembling just above empty. It was then that the glow appeared ahead, pale, patient, waiting. A gas station, small and alone, with a canopy that buzzed faintly in the dark. You pulled in, the tires crunching on loose gravel. The pumps looked old, but still operational, their digital screens flickering faintly. You slipped the nozzle into your tank, listening to the quiet gurgle of fuel, though even that sound seemed muffled, as if heard through water. Inside, the station smelled faintly of oil and dust. The cashier was a thin woman in her 50s, with hair that had the dull sheen of metal under the fluorescent light. She didn't speak as you approached the counter, just rang up the sale and printed a receipt. You glanced at it. There were no prices, no totals, no station name, only a date. June 12th, 1993. Your fingers hesitated on the paper. You looked up, but the woman's eyes were already somewhere else, unfocused, as if she were listening to something behind you. You turned, but the store was empty. "Your pump's all set," she said flatly. You nodded, folding the receipt into your jacket pocket, though you could feel the faint dampness of the ink against your fingertips. Back in the car, you noticed something strange. The gas gauge hadn't moved, still just above empty, trembling as before. But when you checked the odometer, it had jumped forward by 27 miles. You told yourself it was a malfunction, a glitch. The car was old, the road was long, and you were tired. Still, every few minutes, your fingers went to the pocket where the receipt lay. You could feel its presence, not just the paper, but something heavier, as if the ink itself carried weight. By the time you reached the motel, your hands smelled faintly of gasoline. You didn't notice until you were lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan. You got up to wash them, but the smell didn't fade. Worse, faint black smudges clung to your skin, sinking in like old oil stains. The next morning, you checked your jacket pocket. The receipt was still there, but the date had changed. June 13th, 1993. The miles on your odometer had climbed again, another 30. You hadn't driven anywhere. Over the next 3 days, the changes continued. Each morning, the receipt's date crept forward exactly 1 day. The numbers on your odometer rose in tandem, slow but constant, and the stains on your hands darkened, like the ink was bleeding up through your skin. By the 5th day, your nails had turned the dull gray of weathered steel. The smell of gasoline had deepened into something sour, metallic. You scrubbed until your skin ached, but the stains only spread. You decided to return to the station. The drive back was longer than you remembered, the road winding in ways it hadn't before. The canopy light was dimmer now, flickering with each gust of wind. When you stepped out, the air felt heavy, and your shoes stuck slightly to the pavement, as though a thin film of oil coated it. The pumps stood idle, their displays dead. The front windows were boarded with warped plywood, the edges splintering in the damp night air. No light came from inside, but the smell was there. Gasoline, stronger than before. You stood for a moment, unsure if you wanted to knock. Then you saw something. Through a gap in the boards, a faint white square, paper, taped to the inside of the glass. You leaned close. It was a receipt. The date read, June 18th, 1993. You felt your own receipt in your pocket, warm against your leg. Slowly, you pulled it out. The dates matched. And then, before your eyes, they both shifted. June 19th, 1993. Your car was gone. You hadn't heard it leave, hadn't heard tires or an engine. Only the quiet buzz of something unseen, something patient. The smell of gasoline thickened, curling in your lungs. You looked down and saw that your fingers were no longer stained. They were black entirely, the ink glossy, wet, as though your skin itself had become paper waiting to be printed on. Somewhere inside the boarded station, a printer began to whir. You stepped back, the sound following, the smell following, until the night swallowed both. And when you looked into the glass at the next station you found, the reflection waiting there was not your own. Just a dark road, empty, stretching forever away. The road had been straight for hours, the kind of endless black ribbon that made the steering wheel feel heavier in your hands. The cab smelled faintly of burnt coffee and cold diesel, and the radio had given up pulling in stations 2 towns ago. It was well past midnight when you saw the lights. They flickered at first, like a signal lost in fog, then steadied into the pale glow of a gas station canopy. You slowed, easing the 18-wheeler onto the gravel lot, your tires crunching in the still air. Inside, the place was almost empty. Just a rack of chips, a humming cooler of sodas, and a clerk at the register. A man in a faded collared shirt, his name tag bent at one corner. He looked up when you entered, but didn't speak. You took a bottle of water to the counter. That's when you saw it. Behind the man, instead of a wall or another aisle, there was glass. Large, clean, stretching from counter to ceiling. And through that glass, you could see a road. Not the parking lot outside, not your truck. A different road entirely. The asphalt in that scene shone wet, though you heard no rain outside. A streetlight flickered somewhere in the distance, and the air on the other side of the glass shimmered faintly, as if from heat. No reflection met your eyes. You raised a hand to test it, half expecting to see yourself mimic the movement. But the glass gave you nothing, only the road, stretching into a darkness deeper than the one you'd driven through to get here. Something moved at the edge of that darkness. At first you thought it was the flicker of the streetlight again. Then you saw a shape, low, slow, almost human but not quite. Its limbs bent wrong, its gait uneven yet purposeful. It paused under the streetlight, and though it had no eyes you could see, you felt the pressure of being watched. The clerk's hand trembled slightly as he slid your change across the counter. He didn't look at you. He didn't look at the road. His gaze stayed fixed on some point on the countertop, as if acknowledging either of you, you or the thing on the other side, might invite something worse. "Long haul?" he asked, voice low. You nodded, not trusting your own voice. "Don't linger." You glanced back at the glass. The shape had multiplied. There were more of them now, moving in that strange, patient rhythm, just inside the border of the light. You thought you saw one lift its head, but the angle was wrong, its neck bending too far. You took the change, your fingers brushing his, ice cold despite the heated air inside the station. The moment you stepped outside, the glass was gone. In its place, the back wall of the station, metal siding, peeling paint. You turned in a slow circle. The night was still. No wet road. No street light. You climbed into your truck and started the engine. That night, you dreamed. You were standing on the other side of that glass. The road was in front of you, slick with rain, the streetlight burning dim and yellow. Your hands, were pressed to the inside of the glass, fingertips leaving faint fog marks, and in the reflection of that wet asphalt, you saw the station's interior. But it was empty. No clerk, no counter, no you. Something moved in the distance, just beyond the light. Shapes, low and slow, moving toward you in silence. You tried to step back, but your feet would not move. When you woke, the cab was freezing, your breath a faint mist in the dark. You checked the rearview mirror, and for a moment, just a moment, the road behind you was slick with rain. By morning, it was dry again. But the faint fog of fingerprints lingered on the inside of your windshield, as though someone had been standing there in the night, watching the road, waiting for something to come out of it. And far ahead, through the first drift of snow, you saw a single pump lit in the white, a beacon in a storm that hadn't yet reached you. The storm came down like a curtain being drawn. One moment, the world was open highway under a slate-gray sky. The next, it was a tunnel of white. The road disappearing beneath a tide of snow so thick you could barely see the hood of your car. The wind had a voice in it, long, low, almost like a warning moan that shifted pitch as it wrapped around the vehicle. The heater groaned in protest, blowing air that never seemed warm enough. The dashboard clock told you it was 11:46 p.m., but the sun had vanished hours ago, and the world felt unmoored from time. You should have pulled over. Every instinct said so. But the thought of stopping in that blind, howling void was worse than the thought of pressing forward. And then you saw it. Through the blur of snow, far to the right of the road, a glow, steady, golden, warm. The shape of a gas station canopy emerged slowly, like a photograph coming to life in a dark room. One pump stood lit. The rest were shadowed and indistinct under layers of frost. You turned toward it, your tires crunching over snow that gave way to ice. The wipers swiped endlessly, smearing more than clearing. But the light grew brighter until you could see the figure inside the station. The attendant. He was tall, wearing a short-sleeved button-down shirt, his arms bare despite the storm raging outside. He stood at the counter, watching you approach with a smile that didn't fade even as you fought the wind to reach the door. The moment you stepped inside, the sound of the storm vanished. The air was warm, too warm, and smelled faintly of gasoline and something sweet, like overripe fruit. "You made it," the attendant said. His voice was calm, even friendly, but something in it felt rehearsed. You nodded, stamping snow from your boots, though the melting frost on your coat didn't seem to drip onto the floor. In fact, the tiles under your feet were bone dry. "Hell of a storm," you said. He glanced toward the window where snow was already piling against the glass. "Oh, it won't bother us here." You took a closer look at him. His skin was warm in tone, his hair neatly combed, but there was no flush in his cheeks, no sign that he'd been out in the cold. The smile stayed, unblinking. You asked about the pump. "Number 4, he said, nodding toward the lone island of light outside. "She's working just fine." You weren't sure why he called it she, but you didn't question it. As you stepped back outside to fuel up, the wind slammed into you like a wall. The snow stung your face, yet the pump itself was bare. No ice, no frost, not even a dusting of flakes on its surface. You could hear the faint gurgle of fuel flowing even before you squeezed the handle. Through the glass, the attendant stood exactly where you'd left him, his smile unchanged. When you finished, you tried the driver's side door. It wouldn't open, frozen shut. You circled to the passenger side. The same. The wind howled harder now, pushing against you until you staggered back toward the station. The snow had climbed halfway up the doors, frosting over the glass in delicate branching patterns. Inside, the warmth wrapped around you again. But something was different. The air was heavier, the smell of gasoline sharper. The attendant's smile widened just enough to notice. "Storm's closing in," he said. "You'll be safe here." You sat in a corner chair near the heater, watching frost creep over the windows like a living thing. The snow outside deepened, swallowing the pump in a slow, inevitable drift. The clock on the wall stayed fixed at 11:46. The attendant didn't move. He kept his eyes on the glass, as though waiting for something to appear through the white. You dozed without meaning to. When you woke, the world outside was silent. The snow against the windows had stopped shifting. The attendant was gone. You rose, stepping carefully to the door. It opened easily, no resistance at all. Outside, the storm had vanished, replaced by a blinding, brittle stillness. The air was so cold it burned your lungs. There was no station, no pump. Only an uneven mound of snow, its shape faintly suggesting the curve of a canopy, the straight line of a pump handle buried beneath the drift. Your car was gone. Your footprints from the night before ended abruptly at the edge of the mound, as though you'd walked into the snow and never stepped back out. And when the wind returned, faint at first, then louder, it carried a sound with it. The faint, steady gurgle of fuel flowing where nothing stood. By the time you heard the faint whir of a videotape rewinding, the snow was already filling your shoes. Somewhere, just beyond sight, a screen was waiting to play. The snow on your boots hadn't even melted when you heard it. The faint, mechanical whir from behind the counter. A sound that didn't belong to this decade, let alone this storm. The clerk was a narrow man in a thick wool sweater. the kind with a high neck and buttons that seemed designed to trap heat close to the skin. His hands were pale, almost colorless, and his eyes flicked up from a battered cash register as you entered. Without a word, he reached below the counter and came up with a VHS tape. It was scuffed, the kind of scuff that came from years rattling in glove compartments and forgotten drawers. A strip of masking tape clung to the spine, the handwriting on it warped by age and handling. It didn't say, "Play me." It didn't say, "Do not watch." It simply had your name. "You left this here," the clerk said. You frowned. "I've never been here before." He didn't argue, just pushed the tape closer until it touched the counter's edge. "It's yours." You told him you didn't even own a VCR, but he shook his head and gestured toward the far corner, where a small TV sat on a rolling cart, its screen dark and dusty. A VCR was built into the base, the slot a thin, waiting mouth. Something in the air shifted when you picked up the tape, as if the room had been holding its breath and was now bracing for what came next. You slid it in. The picture crackled to life. A grainy view of a gas station lot, shot from an angle too high to be a customer's camera. The canopy over the pumps swayed in an invisible wind. Then you saw yourself. You were wearing the coat you had on now, your hands bare despite the cold. You watched your own face glance toward the window as if you knew you were being filmed. The date in the corner of the screen read April 17th, 2031. You checked your phone's lock screen. It was still 2025. I don't understand, you said. The clerk didn't respond. He was watching the screen, but not with curiosity, more like someone forced to re-watch a scene they'd already memorized. The footage jumped. You were no longer at the pump. The camera now faced the inside of the store, angled toward the counter. Behind it, behind this counter, stood you. The same coat, the same boots, the same expression you felt tightening your face right now. Your mouth on the tape moved, but the speakers only hissed static. You hit stop. The screen went black, then it flickered back on. The exact same frame. You, behind the counter. This time your taped self raised a hand and waved. Not to the camera, but to you. You ejected the tape. The VCR accepted this as a suggestion, not a command, and simply swallowed it back. The static began to grow louder, each hiss sharper, almost wet at the edges. Beneath it, a faint voice threaded through. Your voice. Need fuel tonight? The clerk still hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on you now, not the tape, and they were full of something you couldn't name. You turned for the door. It didn't open. Not even a rattle from the handle. The air around you felt heavy, as though the store had sunk a foot deeper into the earth while you weren't looking. On the screen, your taped self leaned closer until only your mouth filled the frame. Need fuel tonight? The static roared. The lights in the ceiling flickered. Somewhere, a pump outside clicked as if finishing a fill. When the tape cut to black, you realized the clerk was gone, and your hands were resting on the counter. And the next sound you heard was the door opening. A stranger stepped in, brushing snow from their coat. Your voice, from your own mouth, rose without your permission. Need fuel tonight? The stranger hesitated, then nodded. Somewhere beyond the walls, the pumps began to hum, and a shadow crossed the glass that wasn't cast by anyone in the room. The lot was dark when he stepped out from the shadow of the ice machine. He didn't wave, just stood there in a long coat that caught the faint spill of your headlights. You'd seen him the moment you pulled in, but somehow, when you left the counter, he was closer to the curb. Headed east? He asked. voice low but clear. You hesitated. It was well past midnight, and the road beyond the station was a black ribbon with no end. The kind of dark where you measured time by the hum of your own tires. Not far, you said. He nodded, like you'd given the answer he expected. I know a faster way, avoids the hills. I can guide you. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent light above the pumps buzzed like it might burn out at any second. You unlocked the door. The passenger seat groaned when he sat, not from his weight, but from the strain of old upholstery meeting something it didn't quite understand. Left out of the lot? He said. I followed. The station faded behind you quicker than it should have. One moment in the mirror, the next gone. The road curved into a stand of trees that blocked out the moonlight entirely, as though you'd driven into the hollow of something's ribcage. Straight for 2 miles, he murmured, then a right where the fence is broken. You didn't see any fence. At each turn, the dark grew heavier. Your high beams seemed to sink into it instead of cutting through. You've done this before? You asked, trying to keep your voice casual. His face was turned toward the window. Every night. There was something in the way he said it, not tired, not proud, but final. Another mile, the trees pressed closer. The air in the car felt thick, damp. You glanced at the clock. The digital numbers glowed 1:47 a.m. You could have sworn it had read 1:47 15 minutes ago. Left here, he said. You slowed. There was no road, only a shadow between 2 leaning pines. You sure? He turned his head then, and for the first time you saw his eyes. They were pale in a way that didn't reflect your dashboard light, more like they reflected something you couldn't see. I'm sure, he said. You didn't remember agreeing, but the tires crunched over frost-hardened ground and the trees swallowed you whole. When you glanced at the passenger seat again, it was empty. The seatbelt light glowed red. Your foot hit the brake, but the car didn't slow. The wheel in your hands felt slick, as though something had passed over it, leaving a thin coat of cold. Somewhere far ahead, through the dark, a glow bloomed. Not headlights, not a house. A gas station canopy, but not the one you'd left. The paint on the walls was blistered and curled. The glass was gone from the windows. A shape inside was blackened against the light of a fire that had already happened. You pulled over, heart hammering. The canopy flickered, not in the way a flame does, but in the way old footage struggles to hold its image. You realized you weren't looking at the station now, but at a photograph of it. A photograph so large it filled the tree line. It was an evidence photo. You could see the white card at the bottom, the blurred text of a date. March 12th, 1979. Your car was still moving, the seatbelt lights still on. And you understood. Whatever had been beside you had brought you here for a reason. The photograph began to burn from the center outward, and in the crackle, you heard the voice again, from nowhere and everywhere. Left out of the lot. I can guide you. When the flames reached the edges of the photograph, there was nothing left of the station, the trees, or the road. Only your headlights cutting through an empty, endless dark. He had been mopping the back hallway since 9 o'clock, and the sound had never stopped. A thin, steady hiss, the sink running in the locked restroom. It was the only bathroom in the building, and after hours, nobody came in except the clerk up front. Yet every time he passed, there it was. That same slow, endless trickle of water. The janitor leaned on his mop handle and knocked once. The sound didn't falter. He knocked again, harder this time. No answer. but from under the thin gap at the bottom of the door, a shadow shifted, long and narrow, moving with the slow rhythm of someone pacing in a tight circle. "You all right in there?" he called. No response. The shadow stopped. The silence was worse than the sound had been. He rattled the handle, still locked. "Store's closing soon," he said, but the words felt strange in his mouth, as if the hallway itself didn't believe him. The building creaked faintly. Somewhere outside, the wind slid against the glass doors at the front. When he walked away, the sound started again, water flowing, gentle but constant. He thought of old pipes, of something stuck in the line. Still, the shadow had been too precise for that. Half an hour later, the noise persisted. He'd finished the front aisles, stacked the chairs in the tiny dining nook, and swept the grit from the doorway. The only thing left was the restroom. He dug the master key from his belt. The handle resisted, as though it didn't want to turn, even with the key in place. It gave on the third attempt, a quiet click that was almost a sigh. The water stopped. He pushed the door open. Inside, it was bone dry. The sink shone faintly under the weak overhead light, but no droplets clung to its edges. The floor was spotless. The cold hit him next. Not the kind you breathe in on a winter night, but the kind that seems to rise from inside your own chest. It prickled across his skin, and he found himself breathing shallowly to keep from shivering. The mirror above the sink was spotless too, though the glass seemed thicker than it should have been, as if the silver backing were layered over something else entirely. In the reflection, the hallway behind him was dark, darker than it looked when he turned his head. Then the lights in the gas station outside the building began to flicker. He didn't remember seeing the gas station from this angle. In fact, the building shouldn't have had a window at all. But in the mirror, there it was. The canopy lights pulsing, the pumps standing silent in a lot that was somehow empty and crowded all at once. A figure moved between the pumps, tall, its head turning in a slow arc toward him. He stepped back, and the cold deepened, the air growing thin in his lungs. When he looked away from the mirror, the sink's faucet was dripping, thick, dark drops that stained the porcelain like oil. They were falling faster now. He backed into the hallway, heart pounding, and shut the door. The click of the lock was louder than it should have been. The sound of running water started again immediately, and under it, faintly, a steady pacing. When he finished his shift, the restroom light was still on. He didn't look in the mirror again. Some doors, he thought, are better left locked, even if you have the key. The sign hadn't been lit when she came in. She was sure of it. The back hallway had been just another dim corridor lined with cardboard boxes and the faint smell of bleach. But now, from where she stood by the coolers, she could see it glowing. Exit. Its blocky letters bleeding red into the shadows. It was strange for a place this small to have a second exit at all. The front door was only a few steps from the counter. She hadn't seen any other customers go that way. The clerk didn't look up when she headed toward it. The closer she got, the brighter it seemed. Not just a sign, but a warm rectangle of promise. The kind of glow you'd follow at the end of a long night drive. The handle turned easily. She expected the gravel lot out back, maybe a dumpster and the hum of the ice machine. Instead, the door swung open on a vastness that made her knees lock. There was no ground, no lot. Just a sky, if you could call it that, stretching in all directions, black enough to hurt. The stars were too big, too near, each one pulsing gently, like the slow beat of a heart. They cast a light that didn't fall the way it should have, bending around her vision as though she were seeing through something's skin. Far below, or above, she couldn't tell, came the hum of the pumps, a slow, steady rhythm like breath drawn through miles of empty air. She stepped back instinctively. The threshold felt thin, like she could slip and keep falling forever. Somewhere in the dark, one of the stars flared, not bright, but aware. She had the distinct, electric certainty that it was watching her. Her hand tightened on the edge of the door. The hum grew louder, resonating in her ribs. It wasn't mechanical anymore. It was a sound her body recognized, though she couldn't name it. Something between a heartbeat and a low voice. The red light from the exit sign painted the inside of the doorframe, but beyond it, the glow was swallowed by the dark before it could touch anything. She realized then that she could smell gasoline, not the faint, sharp whiff you get at a pump, but heavy, clinging, as though the air itself had been soaked in it for years. The idea came without warning, as if placed in her mind. Step through. Her legs didn't move. The hum slowed. The stars dimmed, but not in distance. They seemed to draw closer, collapsing the space between themselves and the door. She slammed it shut. The click of the latch was soft, almost embarrassed. When she turned, the hallway was dark again. The sign above the door was dead, its plastic face dull and unlit. She glanced toward the counter. The clerk was watching her now, his hands resting on the register. "You saw it," he said, but it wasn't a question. The sign never lit again while she was there, but sometimes, when the hum of the refrigerators cut out, she thought she could hear that slow, patient breathing waiting just beyond the wall.